The house was cheaper than it had any right to be. That is where it starts for most people who end up in Blackwood Reach, the price. A 4-bedroom weatherboard on half an acre with a wood heater and a water tank and a view across the valley to the Dollarite Ridgeline, listed at a price that would not get you a parking space in the suburb of Melbourne I had left 3 months earlier. My wife Ellen saw the listing on a Saturday morning, and by Sunday afternoon we had made an offer, and by the following Friday we had driven the 6 hours from Melbourne on the Spirit of Tasmania ferry, and then another 2 hours inland on roads that got narrower and less maintained the further we went until we turned off the last sealed road onto a gravel track and saw the house sitting at the edge of a paddock with the highland rising behind it, and Ellen said this is it, and she was right that it was it, but neither of us knew yet what it was. My name is Thomas Caro. I am 52 years old. I spent 18 years as a project manager for a civil engineering firm in Melbourne, managing infrastructure builds in urban and peri-urban environments, which is a way of saying I spent nearly 2 decades making sure complicated things happened in the right order and the right time frame, and within a budget that was always tighter than it should have been. That work made me organized and observant and reasonably good at identifying when a system was behaving differently from how it was designed to behave. Those skills have been more useful in Blackwood Reach than I expected when I left Melbourne looking for a slower life. Blackwood Reach sits in a valley in the Tasmanian Central Highland, about 2 hours from the nearest town of any size, serviced by a gravel road that closes for days at a time in heavy winter weather and that the council grades twice a year whether it needs it or not. Population, according to the sign at the valley entrance, is 230. The sign looks like it has not been updated in a long time, and the number feels approximately right for what I observe on any given day, which is not many people and not many vehicles and a quality of stillness in the valley that takes some adjustment if you're coming from a city. We arrived in late March. The autumn was settling into the highland in the way Tasmanian autumns settle, not gradually but in a series of steps, warm days followed by cold nights followed by warm days again, and then one morning you wake up and the cold has moved in permanently and the light has changed and you understand that summer is done. The first thing I noticed that was not right happened in the second week. Ellen had been walking the valley road most mornings, learning the area, introducing herself to the neighbors we had not yet met. She came back from a walk on a Wednesday morning and said that the Hendersons, who lived in the next property up the valley, had invited us for dinner on Friday. She said Mrs. Henderson had been warm and friendly and had known our names and where we had come from and how long we planned to stay. I asked how Mrs. Henderson had known all of that. Ellen said she had assumed the real estate agent had passed on the details, the way agents do in small communities. On Friday, we drove up the valley road to the Henderson property. The Hendersons were exactly as Ellen had described, warm, unhurried, the kind of people who have lived in the same place for long enough that they move through their days without friction. Ray Henderson was 60-something, a former timber worker who now ran a few cattle and did some fencing work for neighboring properties. His wife June was a similar age, a quiet woman who cooked well and listened carefully and asked questions that were more specific than they should have been given that we had only just met. She asked me how I had slept in the house. I said well enough, adjusting to the quiet. She nodded in a way that suggested the answer was confirming something rather than informing it. She asked whether we had found the cellar beneath the laundry. I said we had not known there was a cellar. She said there was a cellar and that the previous owners had used it for storage and that the latch on the access hatch was stiff and needed lifting before pulling. She said it in the same tone she used to tell me the roast needed another 20 minutes. I asked how she knew about the latch. She smiled and said, "Small valley, everyone knows everyone's house." Ray Henderson changed the subject. We found the cellar the next morning. The latch was exactly as June had described, stiff, needing to be lifted before it would pull. The cellar below was dry and empty, concrete block walls, a dirt floor, a single bare bulb on a pull cord that worked, normal in every respect. I noted it and moved on. The town, such as it is, consists of a general store that opens 4 days a week, a community hall that hosts a monthly meeting and occasional events, a small school that takes children from 4 surrounding valleys and that has an enrollment of 22 students, and a church at the northern end of the valley that I have never seen open and that I have never seen anyone enter or leave. The church looks maintained, the grass around it is cut, the gutters are clear, someone tends to it. When I asked Ray Henderson who maintained the church, he said the valley took care of it and found a reason to walk to the other side of his shed. The people of Blackwood Reach are the most consistently pleasant community I have encountered in 52 years of living. They are helpful and generous and they remember everything you have told them and several things you have not. They share food and tools and labor with a naturalness that reminded me in the first weeks of the way communities operated before the kind of transactional distance that cities normalize. I liked them immediately. I still like them. That liking has not been shaken by anything I have observed in the 5 months I have lived here. It has been complicated by it. The second thing I noticed that was not right happened in the fourth week. I had been taking evening walks along the valley road, usually for about an hour before dark. The road runs the length of the valley, maybe 8 kilometers end to end, with properties on either side and the highland rising above them to the east and west. On a Thursday evening in late April, I walked further than usual, reaching the northern end of the valley where the road meets the base of the eastern ridgeline and the church sits in its cleared section of ground. I had not been to the northern end before. I stood at the road end looking at the church in the late afternoon light, and I had the clear and specific feeling of being observed, not watched in the way that a person watches you, observed in the way that a system monitors a variable, clinically, consistently, without judgment or intent. I turned around and walked back down the valley, and the feeling accompanied me for about 200 meters before it faded. I noted it the way I noted anything that seemed significant, made a mental record, filed it for comparison against future observations. Project manager habit. The third thing happened in the 6th week, and it was the thing that moved my mental category for Blackwood Reach from unusual to something I did not have a clean category for. I had been having conversations around the valley about the history of the area, who had settled here when, what the early years had been like. These conversations happened naturally over cups of tea and over fences and at the general store. The history people shared was normal Highland history. Timber cutting, cattle, the difficulties of the early settlers in the first harsh winters, standard material. What was not standard was the consistency of what was not mentioned. In 6 weeks of conversations about the history of Blackwood Reach, I had not heard a single account of anyone leaving. People arrived in the history of this valley. They settled, their families grew. They died here and were buried in the small cemetery behind the community hall. Nobody in any account I had been given had left. I raised this with Gerald Purdy, the local historian who travels the Highland District, maintaining records for several valley communities, when he visited Blackwood Reach in my 7th week to update the community archive. Gerald is 73 and knows more about the Central Highland than any document I have found. He listened to my observation about departures and was quiet for a moment and then said, "People do leave. It is not common, but it happens." I asked him what happened to the ones who left. He said they did well enough in most cases. Moved to other places, built other lives. I asked him if they came back. He said no, none of them come back. He said it plainly and without apparent significance, and then he asked me how I was finding the valley. I told him I was finding it very good, which was true, which is the strange part of all of this. I am finding it very good. In my 8th week I started keeping a written record, not a diary, a log. The project manager habit again, the need to document observations in a form that could be reviewed and compared over time. I have been maintaining it for 3 months, and what it shows me is a pattern that I would not have identified without the writing. The valley has a rhythm, not the rhythm of a farming community, seasonal and weather dependent. A different rhythm, longer, less tied to the calendar year. I identified it first in the behavior of the community. There are periods of ordinary activity, people going about their days in the normal way, and then there are periods where the activity changes in a quality I have struggled to name precisely. The people are still going about their days, but something about the way they do it shifts. They move more deliberately, conversations are shorter and more purposeful. The community hall lights are on in the evenings when I do not believe there is a scheduled event. The northern end of the valley where the church is has more foot traffic than usual, observed from a distance because I have not walked to the northern end since the April evening when the observation feeling accompanied me back down the road. I have tracked 4 of these periods in 3 months of logging. They last between 3 and 6 days. They are spaced approximately 3 weeks apart. During the periods, the community is warm toward us as always, but the warmth has a slight quality of distraction to it, like people who are thinking about something else while maintaining a conversation about something ordinary. After each period passes, the community returns to its normal rhythm, and the distraction resolves. I mentioned the pattern to Ellen in my 10th week. She listened carefully. She is an observant person, more socially attuned than I am, and I trusted her read of the community as much as I trusted my own log. She was quiet for a moment after I described what I had been tracking. Then she said, "I have noticed the periods too." I asked her what she made of them. She said she did not know what to make of them, but that she did not feel threatened by them, which was interesting because I did not feel threatened by them either, and the absence of threat felt like it should be more reassuring than it was. Gerald Purdy came back to Blackwood Reach in my 11th week to return some documents to the Community Hall archive. I met him for tea at the general store and I showed him my log, not all of it, the section about the periods. He read it carefully. He did not look surprised. He asked me how I had identified the spacing. I said I had tracked the behavioral indicators across multiple observations and calculated the interval. He said 3 weeks was approximately right, but that it varied. I asked what varied it. He said the valley has requirements. The requirements have their own timing. The timing is not perfectly regular. I asked him what the requirements were. He put down his tea and looked at me in the way I had come to understand meant he was deciding how much to say. He said the valley has been here a long time, longer than the settlement, longer than any human presence in it. What is in this valley was here before the first settlers arrived, and it will be here after the last of us leaves, if any of us leaves. The settlers who stayed learned to accommodate it. The accommodation has been maintained by every generation since. The periods you are observing are when the accommodation is being actively maintained. He said it is not a threat because it has never been a threat to anyone who understood the terms. I asked him what the terms were. He said you stay, you participate, you do not try to understand it fully. Full understanding is not available, and attempting it is the thing that causes problems. Partial understanding is enough. Partial understanding is what keeps the valley what it is. I asked him what the valley was. He said, a place where something very old has agreed to share the ground with people who know how to be good neighbors to it. I have thought about that answer for 6 weeks. I have continued my log. I have tracked 2 more periods. I have not walked to the northern end of the valley. I have not tried to attend whatever happens in the community hall during the periods. I have been a good neighbor in the way that Gerald described, present and participating and not pulling on the threads. The house is everything we wanted. The valley is everything the listing suggested. Ellen has started a kitchen garden and joined the small group that meets at the general store on Tuesday mornings, and she has made friends with June Henderson in the genuine way that she makes friends with people she respects. I have taken on some project coordination work for the local council that keeps me useful and gives me a reason to be in the community in a productive capacity. We are settled here. That is the honest assessment after 5 months. We are settled in a way that surprised me with how quickly it arrived and how completely it arrived and how little I find myself missing about the life we left. The city, the work, the pace of it. None of it pulls at me the way I expected it to. Gerald told me that people who come to Blackwood Reach and stay past the first winter tend not to leave. I asked him if that was the valley or just the nature of the place being good enough to stay in. He said it was probably both and that the distinction mattered less than I thought. I am going to keep the log. I have decided that. Not because I think the logging will produce answers that Gerald's partial understanding framework does not already cover, but because I am a project manager, and documenting what a system does over time is how I understand systems, and this valley is a system I am now part of, and the documentation feels like my contribution to the accommodation. The next period started 2 days ago. The community hall lights were on last night. June Henderson waved to me over the fence this morning with the slightly distracted warmth of the period days. I noted the start time in the log. Whatever the valley requires in these 3 to 6 days, the people who have been here for generations know how to provide it. I do not know yet what my role in the provision is. I suspect I will know by the 2nd or 3rd winter. Gerald said the full understanding was not available, and I believe him. The partial understanding I have is this: something very old is in this valley. It has been here longer than anyone can document. The people who stayed learned to live alongside it, and the living alongside it is not a hardship. It is a way of being in a place that most people who live in cities have forgotten is possible. A genuine accommodation between human settlement and something that was here first, maintained across generations by people who decided that the terms were acceptable. The terms seem acceptable to me too, which I recognize is exactly what Gerald said would happen, and which I find I do not mind. The view across the valley to the Dollarite ridgeline in the early morning is the best thing I have seen in 52 years of living. I log the periods. I stay out of the northern end. I am a good neighbor. The valley is very good.